August 1914. London is a fever of flags and parades. The city is breathing a collective sigh of relief, as if a long-expected storm has finally broken the humidity of summer. The gilded cage of the British aristocracy is humming with the excitement of a conflict that everyone from the street sweeps to the lords in the Carlton Club. Promises will be over by the time the first frost hits the ground. But while the debutantes cheer from balconies and the young men scramble to the recruitment offices, Millicent Sutherland is looking at the horizon. She doesn't see glory. She sees a vacuum. Millicent is a woman who has spent her life navigating the rigid social architecture of the British Empire. As the Duchess of Sutherland, she is one of the most powerful women in the world, living in a sphere where every movement is choreographed by tradition. But she possesses a restless, forensic intelligence. She looks at the mobilization of the British Expeditionary Force and notices something the newspapers are ignoring. The Empire is preparing for a parade, not a massacre. She leaves behind the marble halls of Dunrobin Castle, where the staff outnumbers the guests and the silence is absolute. She crosses the English Channel on a packet boat, leaving behind the safety of her title. She arrives in Namur, Belgium, just as the German hammer begins to fall across the frontier. The atmosphere in Namur is thick with the smell of coal smoke and unwashed wool. The Belgian air is heavy, pregnant with the metallic tang of impending rain. The British military bureaucracy has arrived with its ledgers and its rigid hierarchy, setting up offices in local town halls as if they are preparing for a census rather than a catastrophe. They have a procedure for everything, except for reality. The Royal Army Medical Corps operates like a gated dam. It is a system built on the fatal flaw of central control. For a wounded man to receive care, he must first pass through a labyrinth of signatures. The logic is simple. The army needs to track every bandage and every morphine dose to prevent waste. But in the friction of war, this means the speed of a bullet is met with the lethality of a slow-moving pen. If the wound doesn't fit the form, the man doesn't fit the bed. Millicent walks into the Namur railway station, and the stench hits her before the sight does. It is a scent she will never forget, a mixture of gangrene, wet earth, and the sweet, cloying odor of high explosives. Hundreds of men are sprawled on the cold stone floors of the terminal. Some are screaming. Most are eerily silent. They are the invisible casualties, men who have been moved back from the front line, but cannot be officially admitted to the military hospitals because the transport paperwork hasn't caught up to their stretchers. The station is a cathedral of neglect. Dust motes dance in the light, streaming through the shattered glass of the roof. Underneath, the cream of the British youth is rotting in the shadows. She finds a young corporal, his uniform saturated with a dark, blooming crimson that has turned his khaki wool into a heavy, stiff board. He is shivering on the damp concrete, his eyes tracking the movement of people he can no longer see. Millicent approaches a British medical officer. He is a man of starch and polished brass, his uniform so crisp it seems to repel the grime of the station. He is holding a clipboard, his eyes fixed on a column of figures rather than the dying man at his feet. "This man needs a surgeon," Millicent says. Her voice is calm, but it carries the weight of a woman used to being obeyed in the highest courts of Europe. The officer doesn't look up. He marks a box on his form with a precise, clinical stroke. "He isn't on the manifest, Your Grace. We cannot allocate a bed without a signed transfer from his commanding officer. Regulations are quite clear on the chain of evacuation." "The man is dying," she counters, stepping into his line of sight. "The chain is broken. Look at him." The officer finally looks at her, and for a moment his eyes reveal the crystallized arrogance of the institution. A patronizing smirk touches his lips, the look one gives to a child who doesn't understand the grown-up world. "This is a war, Duchess, not a charity gala or a weekend at your country estate. We follow the manual, or we have chaos. If I admit him without the proper filing, the entire supply chain for this sector collapses. Please return to your hotel. This is no place for a lady's sensibilities. We have the situation under control." He treats the suffering as a statistical anomaly, a minor error in a grander equation. He believes the system is infallible because the manual says so. He prioritizes the procedure over the human life it was designed to protect, but he has fatally underestimated the physics of the Great War. He treats the silence of the bureaucracy as order, but it is the silence of a tomb. While he adjusts his monocle and checks his watch, the German long-range siege guns, the true masters of the Belgian border, are already being calibrated miles away. He believes his paper walls will protect his dignity. He is wrong. The manual is about to be shredded by steel rain, and his rigid protocol is nothing more than a funeral shroud for the men he refuses to see. Millicent looks at the officer, then at the dying corporal. In this moment, the Duchess dies, and the outlaw is born. She realizes that the system isn't just slow, it is a predator. It consumes the very lives it is meant to serve. To save the men, she must first break the law. She turns her back on the officer and his clipboard. She doesn't ask for permission. She doesn't wait for a signature. She reaches into her own trunks, filled with the fine linens and silks of her former life, and begins to tear them into strips. She kneels in the mud and the blood of the station floor. She ignores the shocked whispers of the orderlies. She begins to bind the corporal's wounds with the fabric of her own privilege. She is no longer a guest of the war. She is its enemy. The Red Duchess understands a truth the generals haven't grasped yet. The system isn't broken. It's just irrelevant. The only way to survive the coming storm is to build a sanctuary outside the reach of the king's regulations. As the first low rumble of German artillery echoes through the valley, a sound like the earth itself is being torn open. Millicent Sutherland stands up. Her dress is ruined. Her hands are stained, and her eyes are clear. She knows exactly what she has to do. She will not wait for the empire to find its conscience. She will build her own war. Zweifel in October 1914. The world that Millicent knew in August has been pulverized. The war of movement has ground to a halt in the salt-crusted mud of northern France. The British Army is in a desperate, limping retreat toward the sea, and Dunkirk has become a pressure cooker of panic. The city is a chaotic hive of retreating infantry, terrified refugees, and the system, which is currently more concerned with the location of missing mess kits than the thousands of men screaming for surgeons. But while the official military hospitals are paralyzed by their own blind spots, Millicent Sutherland is moving through the shadows like a ghost in the machine. She has realized that to save lives in a total war, you cannot be a part of the machine. You must be the grit that slows its gears. She doesn't wait for a requisition order from the War Office. She knows that by the time a clerk in London stamps a form, the man she's trying to save will be a name on a cenotaph. Millicent executes a move of breathtaking defiance. She seizes the Hôtel des Arcades, a fading monument of Belle Époque luxury overlooking the gray, churning waters of the English Channel. Within 48 hours, she has stripped the velvet curtains from the windows and used them to insulate the drafty corridors. The crystal chandeliers are pushed aside to make room for operating tables. But a hospital needs more than a roof. It needs blood, steel, and a way to reach the dying. She turns to her own private arsenal, her luxury yacht. In the pre-war world, it was a symbol of crystallized arrogance, a floating palace for the elite. Now she orders its mahogany fittings ripped out and its holds converted into a high-speed transport for medical supplies. She creates a rogue supply line that crosses the channel in the dead of night, bypassing the agonizing paperwork of the Royal Army Medical Corps. Her unit is a black box of efficiency. It is a sanctuary built on silk, steel, and pure, unadulterated defiance. Because she is operating outside the manual, she is able to do what the official military cannot. She treats the invisible men. The Hôtel des Arcades becomes a clearinghouse for the soldiers the Empire refuses to acknowledge. Deep cover operatives who have spent weeks behind German lines. Fighter pilots from the infant Royal Flying Corps, whose planes are essentially kites made of wood and canvas. And spies who have seen things the High Command would rather keep buried. These men are technical failures in the eyes of the army. They don't have the right badges. They don't have the right paperwork. To the British establishment, a soldier without a ledger entry doesn't exist. But Millicent doesn't care about their rank or their status. She cares about the mechanism of death. She understands that a man wounded by a Minenwerfer, a German trench mortar, isn't just hit by shrapnel. The physics are brutal. The blast creates a vacuum that collapses the lungs before the metal even touches the skin. It chokes like a drowning swimmer. The official hospitals treat the metal. Millicent's rogue surgeons, liberated from the Army's standard operating procedures, treat the pressure. While the British medical officers are busy counting bandages to ensure they stay within budget, Millicent is in the dark of the hospital's basement, holding the hand of a man whose name she will never know, providing the silence that the Army's loud, clattering bureaucracy has stolen from him. But her success is a direct insult to the men in power. One afternoon, a colonel from the Royal Army Medical Corps arrives at the Hôtel des Arcades. He is a man who defines himself by the quote of hubris that governed the era. Efficiency is secondary to the chain of command. He walks through the ward, his boots clicking on the tiles that used to host ballroom dances. He looks at the invisible men in the bedsmen who should, by all rights, be dead according to the official casualty rates. "Your Grace," the colonel says, his voice dripping with a cold, professional disdain. "You are operating a medical facility without a license from the Surgeon General. You are using unauthorized supplies. And more importantly, you are harboring men who have not been properly processed through the evacuation camps." Millicent doesn't look up from the bandage she is winding. "Colonel, if I waited for your evacuation camps, these men would be processed through a cemetery. Your chain of command is a noose around their necks. The colonel stiffens. The rules exist for a reason, Duchess. Without them, there is only anarchy. You are a civilian, a woman. You have no understanding of the strategic necessity of the system. The strategic necessity of your system, Millicent replies, her voice dropping to a dangerous low hum, is currently resulting in a 30% mortality rate for simple leg wounds. My anarchy has a mortality rate of 4%. You tell me, Colonel, which of us is the strategist? The colonel scoffs at the quiet efficiency of the ward. He treats the success of the Duchess as an aristocratic eccentricity, a minor glitch that will eventually be corrected by the sheer weight of the institution. He believes that because her hospital isn't in the manual, it isn't real. But he has fatally underestimated his opponent. He treats the Duchess's silence as submission. He believes the boss, the British War Office, will eventually crush her spirit with a single memo. It isn't surrender. It is the calm before a storm of administrative warfare. While the colonel is dreaming of shutting her down, Millicent is already leveraging her social connections to the king himself. She is playing a game he doesn't even know exists. She has created a high-speed engine of mercy that operates entirely in the shadows of the law. She has turned her yacht into a ghost in the machine, a vessel that carries the truth of the war back to the people of England, bypassing the censors and the technical conciseness of the official reports. But the friction between the human spirit and the massive system is reaching a breaking point. The more men she saves, the more she exposes the failure of the establishment. And the establishment does not like being exposed. As the winter of 1914 sets in, the Hôtel des Arcades becomes a beacon of light in a darkening world. But the shadows are lengthening. The British High Command is no longer just annoyed, they are threatened. They begin to see Millicent not as a nurse, but as a saboteur of their order. She is a woman who has looked into the black box of the war and found that the gears are made of human bone, and she is refusing to let them turn. The struggle is no longer just against the Germans. It is a war of the individual against the monolith. And in this war, the system has a very long memory. November 1918. The Western Front. The roar that has defined the world for 4 years suddenly stops. At 11 o'clock on the 11th day, the steel stops screaming. For a moment, there is only the sound of the wind whipping across the craters of no man's land. But as the smoke clears, a new kind of war begins, a war for the narrative. The guns are silent, but the printing presses are just warming up. The institutional powers that Millicent Sutherland bypassed, mocked, and outperformed for 4 years are now the ones holding the pens. They are the cartographers of memory, and they have no intention of mapping the Red Duchess. Millicent stands in the ruins of her last mobile unit. Her hair is grayed by the lime of the trenches, her hands scarred by the constant use of carbolic acid. She has seen the human paradox in its rawest form. She has watched men die for inches of mud, and she has watched the system prioritize a clean ledger over a beating heart. She has been awarded the Croix de Guerre by France. She wears the Order of Leopold from Belgium. But in the eyes of the British medical establishment, she is still just a technical failure. The rising action of the peace is far more clinical than the war itself. The Royal Army Medical Corps begins the process of the erasure. They don't attack her. They simply omit her. In the official histories being drafted in the wood-paneled rooms of Whitehall, the radical efficiency of the Hôtel des Arcades is reframed as aristocratic eccentricity. They use a specific quote of hubris to cement her legacy. While the Duchess provided a morale-boosting service, her methods were unfortunately incompatible with the necessary discipline of a modern military organization. They treat her life-saving speed as a glitch in their perfect, slow-moving machine. They claim that the war was won by the manual and that any deviation from it, no matter how many lives it saved, was a dangerous anomaly. This is the bitter aftertaste of victory. Millicent saved thousands. She provided the cognitive bridge between the 19th century's slow medicine and the 20th century's need for trauma surgery. Because she was an outsider, a woman who saw the hospital not as a warehouse, but as a race against the clock, she saw the solution the experts missed. While the experts saw complexity and regulation, Millicent saw simplicity and survival. But the system does not reward the outlaw who proves it wrong. While the generals who led millions to their deaths are given titles and estates, Millicent's name is slowly scrubbed from the official triumphs. Her rogue surgical units, which operated at a fraction of the cost and a fraction of the mortality rate of the army hospitals, are dismantled. The invisible men she saved return home, their lives a testament to a woman the history books are already forgetting. The tragedy of Millicent Sutherland isn't that she died in the war, it's that she was buried by the peace. We are left with a haunting irony. The very system that nearly let those soldiers bleed to death in the Namur railway station in 1914 is the same one that eventually wrote the story of their rescue. It is a crystallized arrogance that survives to this day. The belief that the institution is more important than the individual, and that the manual is more sacred than the truth. We must ask ourselves, do we see this same hubris in our society today? We live in a world governed by even larger systems, deeper bureaucracies, and thicker layers of red tape. We are told that the protocol is there for our safety, even when we can see it failing in real time. We are told to wait for the signature, to wait for the manifest, to wait for the experts to tell us it's okay to act. Millicent Sutherland's story is a mirror reflecting our own modern struggle. It reminds us that in a world of massive systems, the most profound acts of humanity often require us to become outlaws. It reminds us that the Goliath of bureaucracy can only be defeated by a David who refuses to play by the rules. Why did the powerful system ignore the only tactic that could save them? Because the tactic required them to admit they were wrong. And to a system, being wrong is a fate worse than death. If you believe that stories like Millicent Sutherland's deserve to be remembered, join our ranks by subscribing and like this video. We have synthesized this narrative from reputable historical archives and verified sources. However, the fog of war often extends to the history books. If you spot any inaccuracies or have additional details to share, please correct us in the comments. We strive for the absolute truth, and your knowledge helps us get there. Thank you for keeping history alive.